Her husband's affair shattered her, leaving her broken and betrayed. But what came next, her revenge, was a twist no one could have predicted. It wasn't just payback. It was a game changer. You won't believe how this story unfolds. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping revenge stories like this. It was supposed to be a weekend to remember, a time for family to come together, to laugh, reconnect, and make memories. The family reunion was always a highlight for Sarah, who had long been the glue that held everyone together. With her husband Mark by her side, it seemed like the perfect occasion. Their children were excited to see their cousins, and Sarah couldn't wait to catch up with her relatives. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last rays of the evening lit up the backyard, Sarah had no idea that the day would take a sharp turn into something she would never be able to forget. The reunion was held at her aunt's sprawling estate, nestled on the outskirts of town, where the family had spent countless summer weekends. The sounds of children playing in the yard, laughter filling the air, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the breeze, all gave the evening a sense of normalcy. Everything felt perfect. On the outside, at least. But beneath the surface, Sarah's heart had been carrying a weight she hadn't yet fully acknowledged. For weeks, she had noticed subtle shifts in Mark's behavior. He had become distant, distracted, often lost in his phone, and had started avoiding long conversations with her. She'd tried to brush off the nagging feeling in her gut, assuming it was just the stress of work or family life. But a voice in the back of her mind whispered that something wasn't right. That evening, Sarah noticed Mark slipping away from the group more often. He would step outside to take calls, disappear for short walks, and sometimes just stare at his phone with a strange expression on his face. She tried to shake off her suspicions, attributing his behavior to the hectic pace of the reunion. But her intuition couldn't be ignored. As the evening progressed, Sarah excused herself from the crowd to check on the kids. She wandered through the house, making sure everything was in order when she happened to pass the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, and instinctively she glanced inside. What she saw would change everything. Mark was standing in the middle of the room, his arms wrapped around another woman, a woman Sarah had never seen before. The woman was holding Mark's face, gazing at him with an intensity that made Sarah's heart drop. She couldn't hear the words, but the sight was enough. The way Mark was looking at her, the familiarity between them. It was all too clear. Sarah's world spun out of control as the reality of what she was seeing set in. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The anger, confusion, and heartbreak flooded her all at once. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to confront them right there, but something held her back. The shock was too much to process. Instead, she slowly backed away from the door, as silently as she had come, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her mind raced, replaying the moments that led up to this discovery. The strange distance, the late-night messages, the avoidance. The woman in the room was no stranger to him. Sarah knew she had to confirm this before making any accusations, but in her gut, she already knew the truth. Her husband, the man she had trusted with her life, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Sarah stood frozen, her back pressed against the hallway wall as she tried to gather her thoughts. Her mind raced, but her heart ached so deeply that it was hard to think clearly. She had walked away from the door, but the image of Mark and the other woman was burned into her mind. It was like a horrible nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. All the little things she had brushed off, the missed dates, the quiet phone calls, his unexplained absences, they all made sense now. He had been cheating, and she had caught him in the act. The man she had married, the father of her children, the man she trusted, had betrayed her. In a daze, she made her way to the living room, where everyone was gathered, unaware of what had just unfolded. She didn't know what to do, how to act. Should she say something now? Should she confront him in front of everyone or pull him aside later and risk making a scene? As the minutes passed, Sarah's anger began to rise, burning away the numbness that had temporarily taken over. She was no longer the woman who would quietly suffer in silence, afraid to speak up for fear of disrupting the peace. She was no longer the woman who would forgive without a second thought. No, she was someone else now. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Mark returned to the room after a few minutes. His face was a mixture of confusion and guilt, but Sarah could see the guilt in his eyes, and it made her blood boil. He walked over to her as if nothing had happened. He was trying to act like everything was fine, like he hadn't just destroyed their relationship in the blink of an eye. "Sarah, hey, I didn't know where you went. I thought you were talking to Aunt Maria," Mark said, his voice falsely casual. Sarah, standing up from her seat with a steady gaze, turned to face him. "No, I wasn't talking to Aunt Maria," she replied coldly, her voice steady, though every part of her wanted to scream. "I saw you. I saw what you were doing in there with her." Mark's face paled, his eyes darting for a moment as if looking for a way to deny it. But there was no escaping it now. He had been caught. "It's not what you think," he began, though his voice trembled. "Sarah, please, just let me explain." But Sarah wasn't having it. "Explain?" She shook her head in disbelief. "Explain what, Mark? That you've been sleeping with another woman behind my back? That the man I trusted, the man I married, has been lying to me all this time?" The weight of her words hit him hard and he faltered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice dropping. "Not mean to?" Sarah shot back, her voice rising with every word. "You don't get to make excuses. You don't get to say you didn't mean to when you were in there, in the guest room, with her." Her anger surged and she took a deep breath to calm herself. "You destroyed everything, Mark. Our family, our life. And for what?" Mark's face was full of regret, but it was too little, too late. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. I know I made a terrible mistake and I've been an idiot, but please don't let this tear us apart." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she wiped them away before they could fall. "Tear us apart? You already did that when you decided to betray me. You don't get to ask me to forgive you. You don't get to make me feel guilty for finally standing up for myself. I will never be the woman who waits for a man to fix what he broke. And you know what? Maybe it's time for me to fix myself. And that doesn't include you." Mark was silent, his face filled with regret and shame. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Sarah held up her hand to stop him. "I need some space, Mark. I can't do this right now. I need to think. And you," she pointed toward the door, "you need to leave." She didn't care if it was the middle of the reunion. She didn't care that they had guests. This was her moment, and she was going to take it. For too long, she had put her own feelings aside, worried about everyone else's happiness. But no more. This was her life, and she was in control now. As Sarah watched Mark leave, she felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of relief. Relief that she had finally confronted him. Relief that she had not allowed herself to be manipulated into staying in a marriage that had long since ceased to bring her happiness. On the other hand, there was an overwhelming sadness. The family reunion, a place once filled with warmth and laughter, had now become the site of a profound betrayal. Her children were playing in the backyard, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed through their home. Sarah's heart ached for them. They deserved better. They deserved a mother who wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And in order to give them that life, Sarah knew she had to let go of the past, of Mark, of the marriage, of the life she had envisioned. As the night grew darker, Sarah retreated to the guest room, closing the door behind her. She sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had just happened. The betrayal, the anger, and the loss were all too much for one person to bear. But in the midst of it all, there was something else, something that started to rise within her. Strength. For the first time in years, Sarah realized that she had been giving too much of herself to the wrong person. Mark had taken her love for granted, and in doing so, he had taken her power. But now she was reclaiming it. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else dictate her happiness. It was time for Sarah to take control of her life and her future. It wasn't going to be easy. She had to face the uncomfortable truth that her marriage was over. But she also knew that it was an opportunity for a new beginning. Sarah wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to thrive. The first thing Sarah did was take out her phone and scroll through her contacts. She reached out to a few close friends, the ones who had supported her throughout the years, and told them what had happened. They offered their condolences and support, but most importantly, they reminded her that she was not alone. Sarah wasn't just a victim of her circumstances. She was a woman who had the power to rebuild, to rise above, and to live the life she had always dreamed of. The next morning, as Sarah sat in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, she began to make a list of the things she needed to do. There were practical things to take care of: legal matters, finances, and the future of her children. But beyond that, there was something deeper. She needed to rediscover herself, to reconnect with the woman she used to be before she had been consumed by the demands of her marriage. She thought about the things she loved to do, things that had been put on hold for far too long: traveling, learning new skills, reading books that inspired her, and most importantly, being the best mother she could be to her children. Sarah had always loved the idea of starting a business, but she had never had the time or energy to pursue it. Now, that dream seemed within reach. The idea of becoming an entrepreneur, of creating something for herself, excited her. It was a chance to build something that was entirely hers, to prove to herself that she could do it. She had always been capable. She just hadn't realized it until now. But Sarah knew that before she could move forward, she had to let go of the emotional baggage Mark had left behind. She had to stop being the woman who was defined by her past, by her failed marriage. It was time to stop being angry, to stop feeling sorry for herself. Anger would only keep her stuck in the past. So, as the days went by, Sarah took small steps every day. She began therapy, focused on her mental and emotional well-being, and started planning her future. She had always been someone who cared about others, but for the first time she was doing it for herself. It wasn't long before Sarah realized just how strong she was. She didn't need Mark to feel complete. She didn't need his approval. She was enough on her own. And she wasn't just going to survive. She was going to create the life she deserved. It had been 2 weeks since Sarah confronted Mark, and although the emotional toll had been heavy, she was starting to see the first signs of change. The house felt different now, quieter but also lighter. The weight that had been crushing her for years was slowly lifting, and she was beginning to feel the stirrings of excitement for what was to come. The life she had dreamed of, the one she had put on hold for the sake of her marriage, was finally within her grasp. The first thing Sarah did was focus on her children. They were adjusting to the changes, but she knew she had to create stability for them, especially as the legal proceedings would soon begin. She spent her days engaging them in fun activities, making sure they felt loved and secure, and giving them the emotional support they needed. But she also made sure to carve out time for herself, something she had neglected for far too long. One afternoon, while her children were at a play date with a neighbor, Sarah took a walk around her neighborhood. As she walked, her mind began to wander. What was she going to do with her life now? She had spent so many years being someone's wife, someone's mother, that she had forgotten who she was before all of that. She had lost touch with her passions and her dreams, and it was time to rediscover them. The walk was long and peaceful, and by the time Sarah returned home, she had a renewed sense of purpose. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and began to brainstorm. What did she want to do? What made her happy? She remembered her love for fashion, how she used to dream about starting her own boutique when she was younger, and the idea sparked something within her. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was done playing it safe. It was time to take a risk. Sarah decided to start her own online store. It would be a boutique for women, offering clothing and accessories that were not only stylish, but empowering. Her own experiences of betrayal and personal growth had given her a deeper understanding of what women needed to feel strong, beautiful, and confident. She knew she could create something special that would resonate with other women who had experienced pain and transformation. She began researching the ins and outs of e-commerce, learning about product sourcing, branding, and marketing. It was all new to her, but she felt excited and driven. She reached out to a friend who had experience in the fashion industry for advice, and soon she had a solid plan in place. Sarah poured her heart into the business, working late nights after putting her kids to bed, setting up her website, and sourcing products. It was hard work, but it felt right. She was doing something for herself, building something that would be entirely hers. The more she worked on the business, the more she felt the weight of the past fall away. In the meantime, Sarah also focused on her physical and mental health. She began exercising regularly, something she had neglected in the past. She started cooking healthier meals for herself and her kids, and she even began practicing mindfulness and meditation. The emotional strain she had carried for so long was starting to dissipate, and in its place, a new sense of confidence was emerging. The first few months were a struggle. There were challenges with the business, shipping delays, customer issues, and the inevitable doubts that crept in. But Sarah pushed through. She had never been one to give up, and she wasn't about to start now. The support she received from her friends, family, and online community of women who shared her story kept her motivated. And then, just as Sarah was starting to see the fruits of her labor, the unexpected happened. One evening, as she was packing orders in her home office, she received a call. It was from a local boutique that had heard about her brand and wanted to partner with her for a collaboration. It was an opportunity she had never imagined, and it felt like a huge validation of everything she had worked for. The collaboration with the boutique took her business to the next level. Sales soared, and Sarah's brand began to gain recognition. She was invited to speak at local events and workshops where she shared her story of transformation and empowerment. Sarah wasn't just building a business, she was building a movement that was about more than just clothes. It was about women reclaiming their strength, confidence, and sense of self. Her reputation as a businesswoman and an advocate for women's empowerment grew, and soon Sarah was being recognized not just in her community, but on a national level. Her story of overcoming heartbreak and building a new life from scratch had inspired countless women who had faced their own struggles. But for Sarah, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about freedom. Freedom from the past. Freedom to be herself. And freedom to create a future that was entirely her own. As the months passed, Sarah's online boutique took off in ways she never thought possible. What began as a small idea born from her pain and heartbreak had transformed into a thriving business, empowering women all over the country. Every day felt like a new victory, not just in terms of sales and customer feedback, but in her own personal growth. The woman who had once been broken by betrayal had now become a force to be reckoned with. Her brand, which she had named Empower Her, was a celebration of strength, independence, and resilience. Each piece of clothing was designed not just to make women look good, but to help them feel confident and powerful. Sarah had poured her soul into every product, and it showed in the way her customers connected with her brand. But it wasn't just the business that was flourishing. Sarah was thriving in every aspect of her life. Her children, though still adjusting to the changes in their family dynamics, were thriving as well. She had created a stable, loving environment for them, and they were proud of their mother. Sarah knew she was laying the foundation for their future, one filled with strength, love, and possibility. However, while Sarah's life was moving forward in remarkable ways, Mark's life was stuck in a downward spiral. The moment he had walked away from Sarah, he had thought he was making the right choice. The younger woman, with her fresh looks and the promise of something new, had seemed like an escape. But as the months wore on, the reality of his decisions began to set in. He hadn't anticipated the toll that his affair would take on him. He had believed that Sarah would simply forgive him and take him back. But when he reached out to her after the divorce was finalized, he was met with silence. Sarah had become a stranger to him, a woman who had rebuilt her life without him and was thriving in ways that Mark had never imagined. As Jason scrolled through social media one evening, he came across an article that caught his eye. It was about Sarah's business, her rise to success, and the impact she had made on women everywhere. The headline read, "From Heartbreak to Empowerment: How One Woman Rebuilt Her Life After Betrayal." As he clicked on the article, his stomach churned. There, on the screen, was Sarah's face, confident, radiant, and strong. The woman he had once taken for granted was now a symbol of empowerment and resilience. The article detailed her journey, from the betrayal to her decision to leave Mark and build her own business. It talked about the way she had turned her pain into purpose, creating a brand that was all about empowering women to reclaim their lives. As Jason read, it hit him harder than anything ever had before. He had lost her, not just as a wife, but as the woman who had been the heart and soul of their family. He had thought he could have his cake and eat it too, a younger woman on the side, and Sarah waiting at home. But he was wrong. Sarah wasn't waiting for him. She was out there living her best life, achieving things he could never have imagined for her. And she was doing it without him. The more Jason thought about it, the more the guilt ate away at him. He had never realized just how much Sarah had sacrificed for him and their family. She had been the one who held everything together while he had taken her love for granted. And now, she was the one who had walked away and built an empire, while he was left to pick up the pieces of a broken life. For the first time, Jason realized how deeply he had hurt Sarah. He had been selfish, believing she would always be there, always forgiving, always waiting. But she had proven him wrong. She had taken control of her life, and now she was living it on her terms. And as much as it pained him, Jason knew that there was nothing he could do to change the past. As Sarah's business grew, so did her influence. Empower her became a household name, a beacon of strength for women everywhere. She was invited to speak at conferences, collaborate with influencers, and expand her product line into new areas. Her mission was clear: to help women discover their power and reclaim their confidence, just as she had done. But success came with its own set of challenges, and Sarah quickly learned that the road to independence wasn't always smooth. One of the first challenges Sarah faced was balancing her professional growth with her role as a mother. Her children, now a little older, were thriving in their new environment, but Sarah felt torn between her responsibilities as a mother and her passion for her business. Late nights at the office, long meetings with suppliers, and constant travel for speaking engagements meant that she had less time to spend with her kids than she would have liked. She often found herself apologizing to them, explaining that she had to work in order to build the life they deserved. But as much as she tried to be there for them, Sarah couldn't shake the guilt that lingered every time she left them with a babysitter or family member. Her parents, though supportive, sometimes expressed their concern about the balance between her work and her family. "You need to slow down, Sarah," her mom would say. "You've done so much, but don't forget to take care of yourself and be there for your children." Sarah understood where they were coming from. She had poured so much of herself into empower her that she was often too exhausted to give her children the attention they deserved. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the drive within her. This business wasn't just a way to make money. It was her life's work, her way of proving that she could succeed on her own. She was showing herself and everyone around her that she could rise above the past and create something extraordinary. The second challenge came when a rival brand began to gain traction in the same space. Sarah had worked tirelessly to build Empower her from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let anyone overshadow her. But this new competitor, a company started by a former colleague who had once worked for Sarah in the fashion industry, was gaining popularity fast. Their marketing tactics were aggressive, and they had deep pockets backing them. The competition was fierce. Sarah found herself spending more and more time analyzing the competitor's moves, trying to figure out how to differentiate herself and maintain her position in the market. She hired a team of experts to help with marketing, website optimization, and product development. She invested in new product lines, including eco-friendly clothing options and a collection that focused on body positivity, areas that resonated deeply with her values. But despite the progress, Sarah couldn't help but feel the pressure. The thought of losing everything she had worked so hard for haunted her. She had come so far from the woman who had been betrayed by her husband. She had taken the shattered pieces of her life and built something incredible. Losing it now was unimaginable. Meanwhile, Jason, still feeling the sting of his own choices, began to follow Sarah's journey more closely. He watched from a distance as her brand grew, her presence in the fashion world becoming undeniable. It was like a sharp reminder of everything he had lost. But beyond the jealousy, there was a deep sense of respect. Jason realized that the woman he had once underestimated had become someone he admired. Sarah had built an empire from the ground up, and Jason couldn't help but feel proud of her, even if he had no place in her world anymore. As Sarah faced these challenges, she refused to back down. She knew that every successful person faced obstacles along the way, but it was how they handled those obstacles that defined them. Sarah wasn't going to let a competitor or the weight of balancing her personal and professional life stop her from achieving her dreams. She had worked too hard, come too far, and had too much to lose. With every hurdle, Sarah grew stronger, more resilient, and more determined. She leaned on her team for support, trusted her instincts, and most importantly, never lost sight of her mission, to help women rise, just as she had done. As Sarah's business grew, so did the pressure to maintain its success. The competition from the new brand was relentless, and every day felt like a battle to stay ahead. While she was passionate about her work and determined to succeed, she began to feel the weight of her decisions. There was a moment where she found herself standing at a crossroads, forced to make a critical decision about her future, her business, and the legacy she wanted to leave behind. It had been several months since she'd launched the eco-friendly and body-positive collections, and while the feedback was positive, the revenue numbers weren't where she had hoped they would be. Her competitors were thriving by catering to mainstream fashion trends, while Sarah's collections, though meaningful, were more niche. The dilemma was clear. Should she continue down this path, focusing on her values and mission? Or should she shift her approach to attract a broader, more commercially viable audience? She spent countless hours poring over spreadsheets and financial reports, consulting with her team, and seeking advice from mentors in the industry. Despite the advice to stay true to her brand, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she needed to pivot to keep the business growing. There were offers on the table from investors who wanted to back her brand, but with a catch. They wanted more mainstream products, less emphasis on niche collections, and a bigger push toward profitability. The pressure was mounting, and Sarah found herself torn. She had built Empower Her from the ground up, and she had always wanted to be a voice for women who had been overlooked by the mainstream fashion industry. But now, there was a real possibility that staying true to her mission could cost her everything she had worked for. The investors were offering the resources she needed to scale, but it would come at the cost of some of the values she had initially championed. As she sat in her office late one evening, Sarah's mind wandered back to that moment at the family reunion when everything had fallen apart. She remembered the devastation of discovering Mark's affair, the heartbreak that followed, and the loneliness she had felt when he walked away. But now, in the comfort of her home, with her children asleep upstairs and the steady hum of the city outside, Sarah realized that her journey had led her to this very moment. Every challenge, every tear, every sleepless night had prepared her for this choice. The choice was clear. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her what she could and couldn't do with her brand. She wasn't going to compromise her values just to make more money. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, and come too far to back down now. The journey wasn't about building a multi-million-dollar empire for the sake of success. It was about creating something that was true to who she was, a brand that stood for women's empowerment, authenticity, and individuality. Sarah called an emergency meeting with her team the following morning. They sat around the conference table, the air thick with anticipation, as Sarah laid out her decision. "We're not changing who we are," she said firmly. "We're staying true to our mission. We'll find another way to grow, but we're not compromising what Empower Her stands for. We'll focus on expanding our community, not just our profits." Her team nodded, a wave of relief washing over them. They had all believed in the vision from the start, but there had been doubts about the direction the business was taking. Sarah's unwavering decision gave them the confidence they needed to continue working toward the goal of empowering women through fashion. At the same time, Jason was slowly realizing the enormity of his own decisions. After his failed relationship with his new partner, he found himself in a downward spiral. He had tried to replace Sarah with someone else, but it was clear that he had made a huge mistake. He watched from the sidelines as Sarah's success continued to skyrocket. He saw her featured in magazines, speaking at events, and building a brand that was respected by women across the globe. All the while, he was stuck in a stagnant life, filled with regret and a deep sense of loss. Jason tried reaching out to Sarah, sending a few texts and even attempting a phone call, but she had moved on. She was no longer the woman who would take him back. She had built her life without him, and that fact hit him harder than any rejection ever could. As Sarah continued to focus on empower her, she grew more confident in her decision. She used her voice to speak about the importance of staying true to one's beliefs, even when the world pressures you to conform, and it resonated with her audience. Women from all walks of life began to rally around her brand, supporting the authenticity that Sarah had built it on. Sarah's decision to stay true to her values began to pay off in ways she couldn't have imagined. As Empower Her grew, so did its community of passionate women who believed in the brand's mission. Sarah wasn't just selling clothes, she was creating a movement. Her brand had become a symbol of strength, authenticity, and resilience, and women everywhere were rallying behind her message. The business flourished. Her social media following exploded, and she was invited to major events and panels, speaking about her journey from betrayal to triumph. Sarah's message resonated with so many women who had been through similar heartbreak, who had been overlooked, or who had struggled to find their own power. Sarah became a beacon of hope, showing that no matter how hard life gets, you can rise above it, stronger and more determined than ever before. In the span of just a few months, Empower Her was not only growing in terms of revenue, but also in influence. Major influencers in the fashion and empowerment spaces began to take notice, partnering with Sarah to amplify her voice even further. She was invited to appear on television talk shows, and she even received an offer to publish a book about her journey. Her rise wasn't just about business success. It was about inspiring a generation of women to believe in themselves and take control of their futures. But even as Sarah's life took off, Jason was still reeling from the consequences of his actions. He had tried to move on with his new relationship, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness he felt inside. His thoughts were constantly consumed by Sarah, the woman who had been the heart of his world, the one who had always been there for him, and the one he had taken for granted. It didn't take long for him to realize that the woman he had betrayed had become someone he could never have imagined. She was successful, confident, and more powerful than he had ever known her to be. She had reinvented herself, building a life that didn't rely on him, and now he was left with the wreckage of his own decisions. Mark reached out to mutual friends, asking about Sarah, but he didn't get the answers he wanted. They all told him the same thing. Sarah was thriving. She was doing better without him than she ever had with him, and that realization stung. He started to follow her on social media, watching her posts, seeing her share empowering quotes and updates about her business. And with every post, the regret built up inside him. Jason tried to contact Sarah directly, an email here, a text there. But Sarah, firmly rooted in her new life, ignored all his attempts. She had built an empire, one that wasn't just about material success, but about reclaiming her power, and she wasn't going to allow him to waltz back in. She had moved on, and she had learned the hard way that sometimes walking away from the people who hurt you is the best thing you can do for yourself. As Jason reflected on everything, he started to see the woman Sarah had become, not as the vulnerable person he had left behind, but as someone he would have been proud to be with, if he had only appreciated her in the first place. He saw her success, not as a threat, but as a testament to the strength she had always had, the strength he had never truly recognized. But now, it was too late. One evening, as he scrolled through one of Sarah's posts about the upcoming launch of a new line in her boutique, Jason had a moment of clarity. He had lost her forever. And it wasn't just because of the affair. It was because he had never respected who she was in the first place. He had allowed his insecurities and desires to cloud his judgment, and in doing so, he had pushed away the woman who could have been his equal in every way. While Jason wrestled with his regrets, Sarah continued to build her empire. She was approached by even bigger investors, but this time, she knew what was most important: staying true to herself and her mission. She was offered the opportunity to expand globally, and with the support of her dedicated team, she began to take her brand international. She had come full circle, and the strength she had developed throughout this journey wasn't just for her business. It was for her children, for her future, and for every woman who had ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship or undervalued. She had proven that she didn't need anyone, least of all Mark, to succeed. As the months went by, Sarah's life was full of new beginnings. She had found her purpose and her place in the world. And even though Jason's regret hung heavily on him, there was no way for him to undo the damage he had done. Sarah had moved on, not just from her marriage, but from the person she had once been. Her victory wasn't in the mansion, the wealth, or the fame. It was in the quiet moments where she realized she was enough. She was whole. She was powerful. As the months passed, Sarah's empower. Her brand continued to soar. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She had become a movement, and with every new product launch, her influence grew stronger. She was invited to speak at global conferences on female empowerment, was featured in magazines, and had even started her own podcast, where she shared her journey, her struggles, and how she had turned her heartbreak into something beautiful. Her social media presence was buzzing with followers from around the world, and Sarah had built a loyal community of women who were inspired by her story. They supported each other, celebrated their successes, and empowered one another to be the best versions of themselves. It was clear that Sarah wasn't just building a business, she was changing lives, including her own. Sarah's relationship with her children had also transformed. She had found the balance between her work and family life. Her children, though they missed the stability of their old family dynamic, were flourishing in the new environment Sarah had created. She was a role model for them, showing them that no matter how dark the times may seem, there is always a way to rise from the ashes. The family reunion that had once been a painful memory had now become a symbol of how far Sarah had come. She had taken the pain of betrayal and turned it into a source of power. Her confidence and success were undeniable, and she was finally living the life she deserved. One filled with purpose, fulfillment, and freedom. But in the shadows, Jason was still watching. Jason had tried to move on with his life, but he couldn't escape the ghost of Sarah. Everywhere he turned, there was something that reminded him of her. Her brand, her success, the way she had taken control of her life. The more he tried to distract himself, the more he realized that he had never fully appreciated the woman he had lost. He had tried reaching out again, a simple message on social media, a few texts, and even a handwritten letter. But Sarah had made it clear she was done. She had moved on, and Jason was left to face the consequences of his actions. The woman who had once been his everything had become a stranger to him. Sarah was no longer the woman he had abandoned. She was a force of nature. She had taken what was broken and turned it into something extraordinary, and Jason couldn't help but feel that he had missed out on the one thing that could have made his life whole. One evening, after a long day of meetings and work, Jason found himself sitting alone at a bar, nursing a drink, when he saw an article pop up on his phone. The headline read, "From Heartbreak to Empire: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into Success." His heart sank. He knew exactly who it was about. He clicked on the article, his fingers trembling as he read the details of Sarah's rise to success. The article detailed how Sarah had built Empower Her from the ground up, turning her pain into a profitable and inspiring brand. It mentioned the community of women who had rallied behind her, how she was now a global speaker, and how she had used her voice to inspire women everywhere. Jason felt a wave of guilt and regret wash over him. He had let her slip through his fingers, and now she was a legend, someone he could never have again. But despite the guilt gnawing at him, Jason knew deep down that it wasn't just his mistake that had led to this. He had taken her for granted. He had never truly seen her, the way she was capable of becoming everything she had now become. Sarah had always been strong, but he had been too blind to notice it until now. In that moment, Jason realized that the life he had hoped for, the one he had taken for granted, was forever out of reach. Sarah was no longer the woman who needed him. She was everything she had ever needed to be, and more. While Jason was lost in his thoughts, Sarah was out there, living the life she had always deserved. She was hosting an event for young women entrepreneurs in New York City, where she would inspire the next generation of women to take risks and chase their dreams, just as she had done. She had created a space where women could thrive, and Jason wasn't a part of it. As Sarah stood on the stage at the Women's Entrepreneurship Conference in New York City, she looked out at the crowd, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride and accomplishment. This was the moment she had worked for, the culmination of years of pain, growth, and resilience. She had built Empower Her from the ground up, starting from a place of devastation, and now she was speaking to a room full of women who saw her not just as an entrepreneur, but as a symbol of what was possible when you took control of your life. The energy in the room was palpable. Young women, eager to start their own businesses, were hanging on to her every word. Sarah spoke about her journey, about how she had been betrayed by the man she loved, how she had picked up the shattered pieces of her life, and how she had turned that heartbreak into a global brand that empowered women everywhere. Her message was clear. Don't let anyone or anything define you. Your pain doesn't have to be your story. The applause was deafening as she finished her speech, and Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't out of sadness, but out of a deep sense of gratitude. She had made it. She had gone from broken and betrayed to becoming a force in the business world. And in doing so, she had created a legacy, not just for herself, but for her children, and for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. Later that evening, after the conference had ended, Sarah sat in her hotel room, reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the moment Mark had left her for the younger woman, the betrayal that had shattered her, and how she had made the decision to never let that define her. She had learned that the most powerful revenge wasn't in getting back at those who hurt you. It was in becoming the best version of yourself. As she sat there with her phone in hand, she received a text from an old friend. It was an invitation to a prestigious business awards ceremony where Sarah was nominated for the Most Inspiring Entrepreneur of the Year award. The text said, "I hope to see you there, Sarah. You've earned this." It was a moment of recognition that Sarah had never anticipated. She had built her business on her terms, not for the awards or accolades, but because she truly believed in the message of empowerment. And now the world was starting to notice. But as Sarah smiled to herself, thinking about how far she had come, she also realized something important. The pain from her past, the betrayal, the heartbreak. None of it mattered anymore. It had all served a purpose, had all shaped her into the woman she had become. She had been through the fire, and now she was emerging as a stronger, wiser, and more confident version of herself. As for Jason, he remained a shadow of his former self, unable to escape the regret that followed him everywhere. He had watched Sarah from afar, unable to fathom the depth of her transformation. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. He was left with nothing but the knowledge that the woman he had once loved had gone on to achieve greatness, while he was stuck in the consequences of his own actions. Sarah, on the other hand, was stepping into her new chapter, one that was filled with possibility and promise. She had become the woman she was always meant to be, not defined by her past, but by the future she had created for herself. Her journey was far from over, and the best was yet to come. As she prepared for the upcoming awards ceremony, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never settle for less than you deserve. And always remember that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. With her heart full of gratitude and excitement for the future, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was unstoppable. Final call to action. Sarah's journey is proof that no matter how broken you feel, you can always rise stronger than before. Now it's your turn. What's holding you back from taking control of your own life and creating the future you deserve? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. We want to hear how you plan to step into your own power. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that they are capable of anything. Keep pushing forward, because your journey is just beginning. Sparkles Flex.